I am Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm Mischievous Mark Giannacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, but the annuals don't count. And Dan, where we are hanging out in our episode today, there were lots of annuals for sale, and I made sure I went to each person and said, these don't count. Why are you even selling them? Just hang it up, buddy.
Does that get you a price reduction?
I didn't know because they just threw me out, so...
Fair enough. Well, hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our Beyond Amazing celebration of Spider-Man's 60th anniversary on the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history, all 60 years of it, of the Spider-Man comic universe.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app. Every other week, we put out a mainline episode of our flagship show, and sprinkled in between, we review new comics as well as interview some of the greatest Spider-Man creators of yesterday and today. This is the perfect time to start listening, especially for the interview part.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a little bit since we've had interviews or this many interviews on the show. So, speaking of which, we've done a lot of interviews on our show. I think over 100 of them in our history, from creators as far back as Gerry Conway to people as modern, as like, say, Nick Spencer or any number of those collaborators, Mark Bagley. And if you want to hear those interviews, a lot of them are starting to move off of our main feed into our sub feed, which is Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues, which kind of has all of our oldest episodes of Amazing Spider Talk, but there are some real gems in there. So if you do want to listen to our full catalog of Amazing Spider Talk, go check out our Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues feed on Apple Podcasts. And if you do go there, please leave us a review. We want everybody to learn about this feed, and the reviews are great ways for Apple to start bumping that feed up into their algorithm, which nobody can figure out, but we're going to try to game it the best that we can.
Algorithms, baby. Well, I always say, Dan, the best way to game an algorithm is to give the people great content, and that is what we got today, because on our continuation of Beyond Amazing, the celebration of Spider-Man's first appearance in Amazing Fantasy 15, 60 years ago, in these episodes, we're taking a very specific lens and applying it to the history and the character. Well, for this one, okay, maybe not exactly, but instead we're going to let other people do the talking, specifically some of the creators who have worked on Spider-Man over the years.
That's right. Mark was lucky enough to travel to this year's TerrifiCON. I was sadly at home. TerrifiCon itself was a celebration of Spidey's 60th, which made it even more bitter that I didn't get to go. But while Mark was there, he conducted interviews with many of the guests that we're going to have on today's show. Meanwhile, I was able to attend a great comic shop in Ventura called Arsenal Comics and Games. I drove over an hour to get there. But Ventura is beautiful at this time of year, so not the worst hour of my life. And there they had a signing party for a special variant cover of Amazing Spider-Man number 900. And I got to interview one of our white whales. Mark, who did we talk to?
Well, I can't speak to who you talked to, Dan, but I got to speak with Gerry Conway, Jim Shooter, Terry Kavanagh, Howard Mackie, John Dell, Sam De La Rosa, Tim Townsend, Keith Williams, and, of course, John Romita Jr. But, Dan, I can't believe when you texted me to say what was happening, my jaw fell. I was in a brewery, of course, because that's what I do, but I was still, frantically texting you, things you got to ask. Dan, who did you talk to?
Yeah, I got to talk to Dan Slott. That's not wrong. Dan Slott is going to be appearing at the end of this episode. So hang on, listen to all the awesome interviews that Mark did, and you'll get to hear Dan Slott on Amazing Spider Talk. I can hardly believe it. Mark, pinch me. Dan Slott is making an appearance on the show.
You are the ultimate flex, as always, Dan. But I can't wait to get to it. But why don't we introduce the first, hopefully as exciting part of the show?
Yeah, Mark. So you got to go to TerrifiCON, which is like a con that's near and dear to my heart. Why don't you tell us a little bit about TerrifiCON for people who maybe don't know about that show and our history with it?
Yeah, well, it's Connecticut's largest comic convention, and part of what we love about it is how focused it is on the creation of actual comics rather than, television or movies. Dan and I have attended different iterations of this show twice before. The first time was in 2013, which is also the very first time you and I met in person. It's also the very first time you borrowed money from me, but we can get to that, of course. And it's also where we scored some of the earliest creator interviews we ever had, and that was with the likes of J.M. DeMatteis, Danny Figueroth, Jen Salicrup, Mark Bagley, and then the legendary Tom DeFalco. And then, of course, then we attended again in 2018, and that was where we recorded our 200th episode extravaganza, and boy, was that an extravaganza. And among our many great... it was. I mean, we did a live podcast in a brewery, of course, and we got one of our big white whales, at the time. I mean, I would still consider him among the pinnacle of people we've ever had on the show, which was Christopher Priest, a.k.a. Jim Owsley, the former Spider editor, who we talked to about a bunch of things, but most importantly, his role in the Hobgoblin Saga, which, of course, we talked about a bunch in our Roger Stern season as well. By that point, the show had grown into the juggernaut that it is today, and it was actually held at Mohegan Sun, which is, of course, where it was in 2022. But, as you alluded to in the intro, this year was also the summer of Spider-Man's 60th anniversary, and the organizer, TerrifiCON, Mitch Halleck, he is a huge Spider-Man nut, admittedly, so he got this star-studded lineup of creators, most of which had connections to Spider-Man. There were so many people to talk to, and the con was very crowded, which I think is kind of a sign of maybe people having pandemic burnout and just wanting to get out and do stuff, for better or worse. So, unfortunately, there was no economical way to get everybody we wanted on the show. So I got as much of a representation as I reasonably could. A bunch of people were like, oh, maybe talk to us later. So maybe we'll have some follow-up interviews from the event. But yeah, it was a great time, Dan. You were totally missed, 100%. Some people were asking about you, like our first guest here, that we'll get to in a second. But it's wild and crazy, man. I mean, like, cons are back. We're doing stuff. San Diego is back this year, and people are looking to talk. So what's better than that, right?
Yeah, nothing. I really wish I could have been there. I had some serious FOMO, but with my newborn son and COVID being what it is, there's always next year. So I'm looking forward to it. I know TerrifiCON will, always be like a big part of our show's history, but also something that we look to every year because their lineup is always excellent. And I'm happy to promote them on, also fearful that it becomes like less and less that little gem of a show that we knew all the way back in 2013. But, they're doing such a great job on the con. I'm happy to see everybody there. I can't imagine, because last time it was really hopping. I remember the lines for Ron Friends. Yeah. I can't even imagine what it was like with, some of the people there like John Romita Jr. and Jim Shooter and so on and so forth. So, well, who are we going to start off with? You alluded to something. Tell me the first interview we're going to talk about.
Well, the first off, I thought we would start the festivities off with probably our most frequent creator guest on the show, which is also just a wild thing for me to think about because I while he kind of scoffs at this title, I do think of him as one of the most legendary creators in all comics, and that's Jerry Conway. Jerry, of course, was the first writer to succeed Stan Lee as the regular writer on Amazing Spider-Man in the 1970s. He's best known for the Death of Gwen Stacy arc before there was social media and he can get death threats online. He also turned Harry Osborn evil, created the Punisher and the Jackal, the original Clone Saga, and then went on to have additional great runs on Web of Spider-Man in the 1980s and early 90s, and Spectacular Spider-Man, where he created Tombstone, Amazing Spider-Man Spiral, which is a more recent story, and also Amazing Spider-Man Renew Your Vows Volume 2 with Ryan Stegman. We just chatted for a few minutes, mainly because, like I alluded to, we've talked to Jerry so many times, it's hard to even think of what to talk about next. But Jerry, of course, still has some great things to say. And, most of it was kind of reflecting on his career and how much of it has been defined by his relationship to the wall crawler. So take it away, Gerry Conway. This is Mark Giannacchio from the floor of TerrifiCON at Mohegan Sun in Connecticut, and we are joined by friend of the pod, Jerry Conway. Jerry, it's actually been, I think, some time since we last had you on the show. I feel like we've exhausted so many topics with you over the years. You've always been so gracious with your time, so I appreciate you taking a couple of minutes here. I think what I actually wanted to start you off with, obviously your backdrop right now is the Punisher, and, coming off of some of the news we got out of San Diego Comic-Con that they were going to bring Daredevil back into the MCU as on Disney Plus, and, what we didn't hear any details about was the John Barenthal Punisher character, and I remember at the time, when that show came out, you had an affinity for both the performance and how they portrayed the character, so, What do you think is going to happen there? You want to see Punisher in the MCU? Do you think it would work in the way Disney has kind of set up the MCU so far?
It's a hard call, but I mean they do seem to be willing to embrace the street level characters now with Daredevil and Kingpin, and even Hawkeye was a little. I mean, it was a lighthearted show, but it had some dark elements in it. I think you could bring Frank Castle into that milieu. I don't know whether you could bring him in as a completely R-rated style character. You'd probably have to bring him back, pull him back a bit. That said, I have no way of knowing what they're up to or what their intentions are. My guess is that they probably want to stay away from that character for a while.
Right.
But the future is there. They've created an opening, so it could happen.
Excellent. Well, to go from the potentially new to going all the way back, obviously this summer is the 60th anniversary of the first appearance of the Amazing Spider-Man in Amazing Fantasy 15. And obviously when it comes to Spider-Man, you have quite a legacy on the character. I know we've asked you, in the past about what are your thoughts of your legacy, and you kind of laugh about that. But, looking, obviously you've done a ton of work in comics, a ton of influential work, but like even looking at your table right now, we have covers for Amazing Spider-Man number 129, 122, 121. To think about like your career and to be associated with this character and such pivotal moments for this character that have been done in movies. I mean, to reach the 60th anniversary and be a part of that history, what does that mean to you? I mean, it's to think that these characters have gone on for this long, I guess, and you're part of it.
I can remember picking up Amazing Fantasy number 15 at a junk store in like 1965 when there were, I think, maybe 20 issues of Spider-Man out, and I paid $0.25 for the used beat-up copy. So I've been with Spider-Man as a reader since the book came out, pretty much. Getting to write that character when I did was sort of like having your childhood dreams fulfilled, but I was still a child. So it was particularly weird. And the idea that something that I was involved with actively 50 years ago, maybe 40 years ago, for the later stuff, that it still has any resonance today is, kind of a sweet deal. It's nice to have been associated with it for whatever limited, time scale I was.
And if you even look at the movie universe, which I think has completely changed the paradigm of comic book superheroes, Far From Home
in December, we had callbacks to the death of Gwen Stacy, callbacks to the death of the Green Goblin. I mean, these are when these movies are out, when friends and family see them. Are you the guy that's saying, I was a part, I did that, or are you past that now?
Well, I do comment on it. I mean, it's hard not to, to have some pride. That's something that you were associated with, still is relevant today. I mean, that's it's kind of remarkable and bewildering because we never had any ideas like that. Yeah. I keep telling people, in the 70s, comics were on a death march. I mean, our sales were dropping every year. There was no real idea that there was a potential ancillary market, and in terms of cultural impact, I think we ranked below Saturday morning cartoons. So it's really hard to imagine that we're so the material is so pervasive now. It's a great gift for me in my old age.
Yeah.
Now, just when I should be fading into irrelevance.
It just keeps going, right? Now, you've obviously had a couple of return engagements with the character in the comics over the years and on the animated series. So I guess from your standpoint, do you think you still have more stories to tell with Spider-Man, or do you think you're tapped out on that front?
I think I probably still have more stories to tell, but realistically, I'm not really capable of doing monthly books anymore.
Yeah.
Or meeting deadlines. I just don't have that level of need or passion.
Yeah.
I would like to. I mean, I do have a story in mind that if I have the opportunity, I might write up on my own and then just send it to the editors and see if they want to do it. But I would hate to pitch it to them and then never show up with it.
Right. So get it done first, and then you can show it off.
Just on my own,
Yeah, that's a good strategy. I like that. Do you want to promote yourself in any way before we?
Well, I'm always willing to share my insights and annoyances on Twitter as ever.
Yep.
You can always follow me at Gerry Conway, and I'll be showing up at some cons this year, and hopefully next year.
Excellent. Well, Jerry, it is always a pleasure to have you on our show. I'm glad we didn't bore you with going over too much nostalgia here, but enjoy the rest of the con, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Of course, it's always great to hear from Gerry Conway. And, I always think back to when we first had him on the show and how nervous we were. And now, I consider him one of the greatest friends we have on the show. So always good to hear from him. So what was it? Well, let me ask this. What was it like to meet Gerry in person?
Well, I got to meet Gerry once before in New York at the New York Comic Con, I don't know, 2014, 2015. But even at that point, it was still kind of, he wasn't a regular yet, so there was still that this time it was just like, hey, like you said, meeting an old friend. He was asking, where's your partner? I said, oh, he's had a baby. He had a baby, that's right. I mean, he knows about our lives, Dan. I mean, Gerry Conway knows about our lives. So he knows about my fitness. He knows about your kid. It's just it's pretty remarkable to think about. But he was very gracious. I mean, he literally was. I did a lap around the con to see who had arrived on that Friday, and then immediately went to Gerry because I was like, we'll get this done. And needless to say, he was signing a few autographs, took a quick break, and then we reconvened. So it was good stuff.
Awesome. Well, who's up next? What's the next big name you've got for us here?
All right. Well, this is a totally new one, and admittedly a bit of a white whale for me, just based on my love of this era of not just Spider-Man comics, but Marvel comics in general. We had Jim Shooter, who was the editor-in-chief of Marvel Comics from 1978 to 1987. I would say he oversaw one of the most successful periods in the company's history. He was credited for helping to stabilize the company after a period of editorial and management chaos in the late 70s. on the flip side of that, his management style has kind of made him a controversial figure in comics and in Marvels. There's definitely a love-hate thing with Jim Shooter, even around that room that day. There were some people like, oh, you talk to Shooter, and other people like, oh, you talk to Shooter. So take that for what it's worth. But he does also have a very specific Spider-Man connection. In addition to bringing aboard writers like Roger Stern and Tom DeFalco, Shooter wrote the infamous Peter and Mary Jane Wedding Annual. And he was also the main architect of the Secret Wars miniseries, which is, of course, where Spider-Man got the black suit. And so Shooter was a big part of that whole development. Especially since we were kind of coming off the heels of Secret Wars being announced at San Diego Comic-Con as the next big Avengers movie in a couple of years. We talked a little bit about Secret Wars. We talked about Peter and MJ and the wedding, and just, again, his general legacy at Marvel and with Spider-Man. So Jim Shooter, we got some time with him. Take it away, Jim.
This is Mark Giannacchio from the Amazing Spider Talk podcast. I'm here on the floor of Mohegan Sun at TerrifiCON with comic book industry legend Jim Shooter. Jim, of course, was the editor-in-chief of Marvel for what I like to think is one of the golden eras of Marvel Comics. Certainly fans of our show know how much we adore Roger Stern, John Romita Jr. run and the DeFalco Friends run on Amazing Spider-Man. Jim was part of that. Also, Secret Wars, one of my favorite stories of all time. Jim, of course, was one of the big architects of that, and so much more. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and sorry for for embarrassing you with the intro here, but I did want to start with Secret Wars only because of the announcement that came out of San Diego Comic-Con last week, which is, of course, is going to be the next big Avengers movie.
Yes.
And I got to say, we've heard stories from DeFalco and a few others over the years about how Secret Wars came to be. It's a toy book, it's that. But when you were developing that storyline, I mean, did you ever in a million years think about the impact that story would have, and that not only was it the first big Marvel crossover, but now that it would be leading to a movie of the same name that's probably going to be $1 billion property?
Well, I knew we were onto something big. I mean, I didn't know exactly where it was going, but I knew that we were doing something interesting and revolutionary. And it wasn't a toy book. Basically, what happened is Mattel licensed Marvel's characters for superhero toys, and they asked me if we could do anything to get publicity.
Right.
And I said, how about we do a spectacular 12-issue story with all the major heroes and all the major villains? And it wasn't like that was exactly my idea, because I got that suggested to me in the fan mail like at least 10 times a day.
Right.
And so they said, well, that'd be good. And so they were not invasive. I never sent them anything to approve. They didn't ask for anything. They just wanted us to get some publicity. So all we were doing is trying to make the best comic book story we could make. Fortunately, I had Mike Zeck and John Beatty. It always doesn't hurt to have great art. We just did the best we could. And to me, what was going to make it significant and why I thought it would have legs is because we made it part of continuity. Mm-hmm. We made it a absolutely irrefutable part of Marvel history, because the story of Secret Wars falls between the December books and the January books. Those 12 issues, what happens there falls in the middle there. So Spider-Man has a red and blue costume when he leaves for Secret Wars in December, and he comes back in a black costume. And I'm always aware enough of the toy business that I knew that Mattel had their toy. They have their own toy fair in January in Scottsdale, Arizona. The regular toy fair is in February. Mm-hmm. So the fact that the black Spider-Man costume appeared in January, right before their toy fair, and we got nationwide publicity.
Right.
Well, that pleased them a lot. And then on top of that, the issue that it's introduced in the Secret Wars series is issue 8, which is August,
right,
which is when they're selling in their Christmas toys.
Right.
So they were just thrilled with me, and it didn't hurt my story at all. I mean, it was perfect. It just worked out perfectly, I think I worked as close as I could with the other writers to make sure that I was sticking with their continuities that they'd had, and I'd approve. I tried not to be a bozo about it. I was the boss. I could do anything I wanted, but I tried to really work with everybody and make it seamless.
Yeah.
And you know what? it was a good group of people, and basically, had a couple of people grumbled at first, and then they saw that the sales of their books were jumping up because Secret Wars was drawing people in, and they all of a sudden they liked me again.
I mean, was that challenging to be both writing that series and then coordinating as the editor-in-chief of everything else that was going on? I mean, like, did you kind of have to write notes on your hand or something to get through the day for something like that? Because that just seems like a management mess to kind of keep up with.
I don't know about a management mess, but it almost killed me. I mean, I was trying to do my editor-in-chief job. I was trying to do the extra burden of coordinating this massive story with all these other writers and editors. And then I have to go home every night and then write till 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
And then I'm back at the office at 7 a.m. I mean, it was a grueling period of time, and it was hugely successful. And when I finally finished it, it went down to the wire, but we never missed shipping. In 10 years, every book made shipping.
Yeah.
And so when it was going down to the wire, I thought, boy, I'm going to take a little break here. So the next day, in early January, I'm summoned to the president's office. I reported to the president. He was the only guy who could overrule me. He says, this is great. He didn't mean the story. He never opened a comic book in his life, but he could read sales figures. He says, this is great. He says, well, how soon can we have the sequel on the stands? I said, sequel? I said, well, maybe I'll start on it around June. He said, no, you'll start on it tonight.
Oh, wow.
He said, I want those revenues this year.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, God. So anyway, I'm right back once more into the breach. I was right back at it. The second time was we made it different. We did it. We'd sort of branched into the other titles, and that turned out to be good. I tried to do it different every time. I didn't want to always just do the same thing.
Now, the other big thing we have to ask you about, because this is just this ongoing debate on our show, and then some, is the marriage of Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson, which of course you are credited with doing.
Yes.
Even though a lot of people who were in the orbit of Spider-Man at that point said, well, I was going to do it, but then I didn't want to do it, and there's so many versions of how that was going to happen. So how did that fall on your shoulders?
Nobody was going to do it without my consent, so they can say whatever they want. But the fact is, it was I was at the Chicago Comic-Con with Stan. And Stan was supposed to do a one-man panel, and he catches me in the hall. He said, "Got to help me." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because all the questions are going to be comics." And at that time, he was running the animation. I had his old job.
Yeah.
And so he said, "Come up on stage with me, and you can answer the questions." And so we did it like a sports broadcast. Somebody asked something about the X-Men, and I'd give them the factual answer. And then Stan would be like the color commentator. He'd tell an old anecdote about him and Jack or whatever. And so it worked out really well. And we get down to the end, and the moderator says, we'll take one more question. Guy in the back says, this is for Stan. When are you going to let Peter Parker and Mary Jane get married? And the crowd cheers.
Yeah.
And so Stan says, no, wait, no. That's not a question for me. He said, I'm not involved in the comics anymore. He said, Jim runs the comics. That's all up to him. Then he turns to me, and he bounces up and down in his chair, and he says, can we, Jim? Can we? And the crowd cheers again. And I said, look, I don't care if Stan's in charge of the comics or not. He's Stan Lee. If he wants to do it, we're doing it, And it's a jump, how high, So anyway, then everybody's cheering and they're leaving. And I said, hey, Stan, now we got to do it. And he's like, oh, yeah. So we did. We tried to coordinate it with the newspaper strip and the book, but it was on 2 different schedules, very hard. But it got done, and I was very pleased with it. John Romita did an excellent job on the covers, and we did 2 covers. I didn't know it was a variant. We didn't know that was a variant. We never heard that word used with covers. It was Jim Salicrup's idea, actually, because we were debating, should we have heroes and villains, or should we have civilians, Peter Parker or Spider-Man? And so Jim Salicrup said, well, why don't you do both? Let's do both. And I said, you can do that? He said, TV Guide does it all the time.
Yeah.
I said, oh, well, if TV Guide does it, must be legit. All right, sure. So we did it, and we didn't know we were doing variants. We just did it once and never did it again. And then all of a sudden it becomes a staple of comic book marketing.
Right. Were you surprised by just the sheer amount of controversy that kind of followed that story years later? I mean, again, when you kind of go back and look at some interviews from some creators who were, they were like, I told you that would have been a terrible idea. You can't marry Peter Parker. He's especially can't marry into a supermodel. I mean, what do you say to that? I mean, I know part of continuity in comics is that something always gets retconned, but do you feel like they should be together, they shouldn't be together? I mean, what's your take on the whole thing?
One of the two creators, Stan Lee, thought it was a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay, case closed.
Yeah.
And if some writer or artist, said, well, they shouldn't have done that. Well, argue with, Stan if he was still around.
Yeah.
The fact is, it's like we did it as well as we could. There's a lot of ways they could have taken it. I don't agree with the ways. I left not too long after that. They did things with it I wouldn't do. Maybe it was, it could have been done differently or better. But the fact is, I wouldn't have had it retconned. I think that's like a cheap cop-out.
Yeah. Just one more question before you wrap, because I want to make sure you get back to your fans here. But, obviously this summer is the 60th anniversary of the first appearance of The Amazing Spider-Man and Amazing Fantasy 15. And, we're going around the floor here asking everyone who has been affiliated with the character in some shape and form, just, what it means to you personally as a creator to have contributed to this character that is such a pivotal part of the zeitgeist, if you will. Obviously the marriage and that impact on the character and his history. What do you do? When you see Spider-Man in the movies and comics and the media, do you ever kind of go back and be like, I was a part of that? I mean, do you feel like personally attached to that?
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like, look, when I was at Marvel, we had the best team ever assembled. I did Archie Goodwin, Louise Simonson, Larry Hama. It's like winning the lottery and Christmas, all rolled into one. I had other great guys, Bob Budiansky, Jim Salicrup, many, I had too many to name. I had 14 editors at one point. But the thing is, we all knew we knew we were doing something special. We were loving it. Larry Hama, a couple conventions ago, said he just couldn't wait to get to work every day. And I know exactly how he felt. And I think we had you talk about the gestalt? Yeah, we had something going there, and we were doing the best we could. And loving it, having fun, and we were creating entertainment, and people liked it. And boy, that's a really good feeling.
Excellent. Jim, is there anything you want to promote for yourself? Any upcoming appearances, or where to find your stuff online, or anything like that?
No, I've got an appearance at Roanoke next week. I have 20-some this year. I don't know, but I know where I'm going when the tickets arrive in the email. but at any rate, I'm not really promoting anything. I'm looking forward to the Secret Wars movie that they're making. I think it's about time. I'm really happy that something that I was involved with, becomes a part of American culture.
Excellent. Well, Jim, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that was really awesome, Mark. I've wanted to talk to Jim Shooter forever, so I was really excited when you told me you managed to nail this. This was kind of like if we can talk to this person, it will have been a success. So that's pretty cool. Our next, guests are people we've had on the show before, have tried to get back on the show, but they're real fun. Tell us a little about who we're going to listen to next.
Yeah, I mean, the next one is they're two separate interviews, which is kind of funny because they were seated like 10 feet from each other and were shouting at each other during each of their interviews, making fun of each other, which kind of gives you the vibe of who they are. They were Terry Kavanagh and Howard Mackie, and I got to say, I preface this by saying, yes, they're returning guests. They are part of what is probably my favorite interview that we've done on this show, which was the two of them with the Clone Saga. I mean, that was just a load of fun and kind of a nostalgic trip for me that, maybe is a painful nostalgic trip, but a great one all the same. And, obviously we had them on because they are the main architects of the Clone Saga, although they feud it even in this interview. We tried to get them to talk about other stuff besides the Clone Saga at Terrificon, but of course it gets brought up because, again, how do you hide from that when when the Clone Saga is part of your legacy, especially when Ben Reilly is the main part of the book. So we talked to Terry, we talked to Howard, but we did talk about some other stuff. So why don't we go to the tape and hear what else we talked about.
This is Mark Giannacchio from TerrifiCON at the floor of Mohegan Sun. I am here with Terry Kavanagh. Terry, you've been on the show before with Howard Mackie to talk about the Clone Saga. I promise not to make you revisit all of that again, but I wanted to talk a little more Spider-Man with you if you had a few minutes, so thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to it, and this gives me a chance to refute everything Howard said last time.
Well, I do have to ask, one of the most recent runs of Spider-Man had Ben Reilly in the lead seat again, and it seems like, I think even since we had you guys on a few years ago, that the Clone Saga has just really come back in full force. It seems to be held in reverence now by a lot of the creators who are currently working on the books, and considering some of the criticism you guys took from back in the day, what's your reaction to this? Are you just kind of like, where were you 20 years ago? I mean, what does it mean to you now?
No, I sort of understood it. I definitely was vilified in the industry for a long, long time. This is actually the first convention I've done in about 20 years.
Oh, wow.
So, but I understand that a lot of the writers now and the creators are people who grew up and Ben Reilly was their Spider-Man, so they get a chance to revisit that. I do think they're putting the poor guy through hell, but I guess that's any creator's job to do to a comic book character. We did it to Peter Parker, why not do it to Ben Reilly?
Right. I was going to say, I mean, given the fact that Ben Reilly's a clone, I mean, do you kind of have even more so than you would normally have in comics, a bit of sympathy for him? Like, how can you make this guy into a villain now? I mean, He was, hasn't, like you said, hasn't he gone through enough?
I'm hoping that won't last forever.
Yeah. I think a lot of fans are. I think there are a lot of fans like, wait, what are you doing to him? With this being the summer of the 60th anniversary of Amazing Spider-Man's first appearance, obviously you worked with the character for several years as both a writer and editor. You were a key contributor to a story that is truly part of the legacy of the character, whether it's fondly remembered or not, regardless of where you. I mean, it's a significant portion of the character, and so like when we come up on these big anniversaries like this, do you feel a sense of either nostalgia or pride, even to be part of that legacy in any way? Do you not think in those kinds of terms?
Mostly, I feel very privileged to have been a part of it. I mean, the character, Marvel Comics, comic books in general, and Spider-Man were all very important to me when I was young, and just brought me so much joy and pleasure that the opportunity to have done that myself for other people is immeasurable.
Yeah.
It really is. The joy from that is immeasurable. That is a win for me.
I think when we had you on last time, because we were so focused on the Clone Saga, we really didn't ask about your origins with Spider-Man, but how did you come to the character? I mean, were you always a fan? I mean, do you remember your first issue? I mean, what was your connection to Spider-Man before you actually started working on Spider-Man?
Well, I was a huge fan. So I don't remember the first issue that I had specifically, but I remember from the first issue that I bought at my local candy store, going to the Phil Seuling comic book conventions in New York and getting the back issues and doing all of that. And the reason the Clone Saga, what inspired me about the Clone Saga is I fondly remember that original Jerry Conway story with the first appearance of the clone way back when, that I remembered that ended. It was such a powerful ending. And I just remember thinking, the clone wasn't a bad guy. This was two good guys in a bad situation, and how interesting a story can you make out of that?
Yeah.
And that's why we revisited it.
Excellent. Well, Terry, thank you so much for doing this. Is there anything you want to be promoting coming up, or any other projects you got going on right now?
Yes, Howard, Mackie, and I are working on a project called City of Light. I wish you had a camera. I could show you the QR code that would take you to the site. The site is just up. It's going to be connected with an entire megaverse, games, anime, etc. So look for it soon online, City of Light.
Excellent. That sounds really exciting, Terry. I'm looking forward to it. So thanks again for joining us. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great rest of the con.
Thanks for having me.
You got it.
Bye.
This is Mark Ginocchio from the floor of Terrificon here at Mohegan Sun, and I am here with returning guest Howard Mackie. Of course, Howard was one of the great contributors to the story of Peter Parker and the Amazing Spider-Man for years. You sometimes try to refute credit, but obviously responsible for the Clone Saga, the second volume of Amazing Spider-Man, Peter Parker Spider-Man. I mean, you've been connected to this character for years. Is it guilty as charged or a point of pride for you at this point?
Well, it depends. If you hated the Clone Saga, as I always say to everyone, it was all Terry Kavanagh's idea.
Yeah.
If you loved the Clone Saga, obviously all those parts were me. And a little bit of DeFalco and DeMatteis.
It's just worth noting that Terry is like 5 feet away from us right now.
He could be 50 miles away and he'd hear my voice.
I do want to start you with a question I asked Terry a few minutes ago, which was, one of the more recent runs of Amazing Spider-Man had Ben Reilly as the main character. The clone is back. Of course, it ends with Ben Reilly becoming a villain again. When we had you on a few years ago, we were talking about the Clone Saga and obviously the controversy surrounding that. But, it seems like since that interview, even more so, that story has been held in such reverence. It's been referenced in a bunch of events that the Spider-Man comics have done and new runs and whatnot. Like when you think back to that, and especially with the heat you took at the time, are you kind of like, where was this love and adoration 20 years ago? Or do you kind of just laugh it off at this point?
You got to laugh it off. What we're getting is validation for what we set out to do and what we were charged to do. And I all kidding aside, I give Terry a lot of credit for inspiring the story that we came up with. And what I get at conventions like this one all the time is people coming up to me who are closer to your age than mine and saying, well, Ben Reilly was my Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And that's exactly who we were writing the stories for.
Yep.
It was at a time at which so many of the fans were aging out of comics, and we felt like Spider-Man 2 was aging as the writers were aging.
Right.
And we wanted to try to give the readers a jumping on point, younger readers a jumping on point. And as I said, I get people coming to my table all the time at conventions saying, they've never heard any of the negative stuff about the Clone Saga.
Yeah.
And that I think is enlightening as well. So yeah, I really have no, there, of course, it went on way too long. I would have preferred that it had stuck to what we originally intended, which it was 3 months of stories.
Yep.
And I have the original, because I'm a notebook guy, so I have the notebook where we mapped out the 3 months because we figured it was 3 months, 4 titles, that's 12 issues, that's a year's worth of stories.
Yeah.
And that would still be my preference, because then I look at all the stuff where we meandered, because we were now spinning in in place, because we weren't allowed to end it. So,
yeah. Well, I hope this doesn't make you laugh cry, but one of the things I felt that was most effective about the most recent run with Ben Reilly was it was from the onset of finite number of issues. It's like, we're going to do 21 installments of this over the next 4 months, and that's that. And to your point, it just, having that kind of efficient storytelling just made it work.
Well, and you know what? That is a luxury that they have right now that we did not have then. Because it was more common for stories and teams to continue, and now, 21 issues seems like a long time in current comic book storytelling. Good for them.
Yeah. The other thing we're talking to folks about at the con this weekend, it's the 60th anniversary of Spider-Man's first appearance in Amazing Fantasy 15, and obviously you as a major contributor to his story. You know, I don't think when we had you on the first time that we got like your, what we like to refer to, your origin story with Spider-Man. I mean, were you always a fan of the character? I mean, do you remember your earliest engagements or interactions with him, your first comic with him? I mean, what's your story with him there?
I'm terrible at remembering the first comics
Yeah.
of anything, but what happened was I grew up, I have 3 older sisters, okay, and so much older sisters. And one of my oldest sister is 17 years older than I am. And they all had jobs early on when I was a wee lad, just learning how to read. And they thought it would be a great idea to look good to their baby brother, but every payday, back when we used to have newsstands that sold, they would stop by a newsstand and bring me home some comic books.
Right.
In the very beginning, it was the ones that they secretly wanted to read.
Right.
So a lot of Archie comics and Harvey comics with a lot of Lot and Little Dot and Richie Rich. And then the first time they brought me home a superhero comic, and it was probably a combination of Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man. And I was hooked.
Yeah.
And I couldn't read, but I wanted to know, so they would read the stories to me, or I would just flip through, look at all the pretty pictures, and wanted to know what was going on. So I taught myself to read at an early age, so I could read comic books. And so Spider-Man was an early love of mine, and then I had a good friend, Johnny Alberico, I remember his name, during winter time when it was too cold for us to do anything outside. We'd go sit, a group of us would sit at his dining room table, and we'd pass around John Romita Jr. comics, with Spider-Man, and try to draw. We would spend a lot of time trying to draw. And so for me, many years later, when my first day on staff at Marvel as an assistant editor, within the first 2 hours of working there, I was brought down and introduced to John Romita Sr. I was in awe.
Yeah.
And then later on as an editor, I got to edit Steve Ditko.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting, and Steve was a great guy. He would come in, turn pages, and it'd be something like Speedball or things like that. He'd bring the pages in, and he'd narrate his storytelling, which of course was super clear. But he would tell you the story.
Yeah.
Steve Ditko, usually with a toothpick hanging out of the side of his mouth. And I'm sure everything he said was very interesting, but in my under 30-year-old mind, and forgive me for the language I'm about to use, but all I was saying inside my head was, this is fucking Steve Ditko. This is fucking Steve Ditko. Over and over again.
Yeah.
And he would just come to my office sometimes and just hang out.
Yep.
And it was awesome. So, yeah, Spider-Man. And then I got very lucky when I went off staff. Ghost Rider was my early success, and as soon as it was a proven success and it looked like I was leaving staff, the editor of Spider-Man at that time, who was Danny Fingeroth, came and said, do you want to write Spider-Man?
Yeah.
And how do you say no?
No, exactly. I mean, and we've talked to other creators in the past who have talked about, it's one thing to work on Spider-Man comics in general, but like when that request comes for you to work on Amazing Spider-Man, it's kind of like, you're going from minor leagues to the major leagues. And, obviously when you did the second volume, the reboot, you worked first with John Byrne, and then JR was on that book with you. I mean, and I know you would work with JR on other titles too, but like for you to kind of graduate up and work with these superstar artists, I mean, like did it blow your mind, or at that point was it just more of the same for you?
The Amazing Spider-Man stuff was maybe kind of a kick in the butt, but the artists, they were friends.
Yeah.
I knew them all prior to that. John and I we have a great time. We make fun of each other mercilessly. I give him a hard time about drawing every superhero squatting on a rooftop in the rain. And then he just hits me. And John Byrne, I started out, I knew all of these guys when I was an assistant editor.
Yeah.
And then they just became friends. I mean, Byrne and I are still very good friends. We talk to each other all the time. one of the guys that he does still talk to.
Which is great.
Oh, no, it is. I mean, we're good friends. So I was less impressed. I mean, like I said, the only people that really impressed me in terms of comic book, royalty,
Yeah.
it was John Romita Sr. It was Ditko, certainly. And then, look, we all got to have lunch with Dan every once in a while.
Yeah.
And and he would just hold court, and we just hang on every word. Everybody else they were just,
Yeah.
they were our colleagues.
Yeah. Just John in accounting. No.
I just a few years ago, I asked somebody to introduce me to Greg Capullo at a convention.
Yeah.
Because I really loved his Batman stuff.
Yeah.
Actually, I asked Fabian Nicieza to introduce me to. And Fabe looked at me and said, "Howard, you gave Greg his first work at Marvel."
Yeah.
Oh, good for me. I have good taste. I've worked with a lot of people, and mostly it's a working relationship. Some people I love, some people like Terry, whatever his name is, I'd like to forget.
Yeah. Before we let you go, is there anything you want to promote, or any appearances coming up that you want to let people know about, or floor's yours?
Well, I should call Terry over here. Did he already promote this?
He did, but you can do it again.
I realize I got to work on my pitch on this, Terry. Yeah, people ask me. Anyway, Terry, Kavanagh, and I tolerate each other enough to talk to each other on the phone occasionally, and we do some work endeavors together. And we have a small, I'm going to call it an imprint, right? Inksmith that we do. We've done a lot of custom comics for people.
Yep.
If they're interested in Inksmith, that's INKSMYTH.com. You can check out the website. But we've partnered with an overseas international organization of evil that is looking to take over the world. Is that it? Thereabouts. But that is very heavily invested in the NFT corner of the world, and they've asked us to create some comics for them.
Yeah.
And we're doing that. It's a dystopian future that we're really helping develop from the ground up, and it's been a lot of fun. Plus, again, all kidding aside, I get to work with Terry, who we've known each other in every aspect of our working life together.
Right.
We were assistant editors, then I was his editor on a few projects. He was my editor on a lot of projects. Then we co-wrote things together. There's a real comfort in our working together. He's one of the few people that I have implicit trust in terms of an editor. He has no problem, turning me off or turning me around when needs be.
Excellent.
And so it's a good working relationship, and we're having a lot of fun with this right now.
Excellent. Well, Howard, thank you so much for your time. I will let you get back to the show and the fans and signing stuff, but would love to have you back again sometime, whenever the mood strikes, I guess.
Okay.
Always a great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for talking.
You got it.
Hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you could jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more.
Think of it like the not toxic Twitter and Reddit Spider-Man communities, because they're the worst, and this Slack is the best. I hang out there all the time. This week we've been talking about how John Romita Jr. keeps dropping these videos of him drawing Amazing Spider-Man on Twitter, which kind of spoil major things that are coming up in the comic, but are also kind of awesome and the best marketing tool ever devised. So I guess that's a win. We have like internet sleuths in the Slack that are like it's the Zapruder film. Like we are just taking these videos apart. So we're like 10 episodes ahead of issues ahead of everybody else in breaking down what John Romita Jr. is drawing. So anyway, if you want to be a part of that conversation, come join our awesome Spider-Man community on the Slack. There's a link in the description to this episode, And you click there, you sign up, give yourself a handle, jump in, introduce yourself, and we're a happy bunch over there and would love to welcome everybody into our community. All right, Mark, so you kept... Nope, that was not a good... All right, Mark, so your journey to TerrifiCon was not nearly over with some of those big names. Tell me a little bit more about your weekend there. You know, that seemed to be your Friday. What happened as the weekend continued?
Yeah, I mean, I got to be honest. It was the show was really hopping on Saturday, so I was a little concerned about who I might be able to talk to because it's always this delicate balance. The creators who are there. I mean, they're there to either work or make money. I mean, while it's nice to to interact with fans and podcasters like us, I also don't want to step on their toes for sketch time and stuff like that or signings, etc. So I did happen to get several interviews on Saturday. There were also a couple of Spider-Man panels, which we'll have some excerpts from. But in terms of the one-on-one interviews, 4 of those guests, I feel they are part of what you would call the unsung heroes of comics, right? They're the inkers. The inkers are great, right? I mean, who doesn't love the inkers? We probably talk about inkers more than most people do, but that's their fault, not ours, in my opinion.
Frankly, we could talk about inkers more than we do. It's just so hard to find that line between what you think is the inker's work and the penciler's work. But a good inker, you can see it immediately on the page.
Absolutely, and I think in terms of inkers, we have some pretty renowned ones here on the show. The first one up is John Dell. He's been an inker on various Spider-Man comics for years. He's usually paired off with Mark Bagley, who was also 10 feet away from him. And when that connection got brought up, he kind of, in typical Bagley fashion, he kind of raised his eyebrow. He was like, "I can hear you, John." I mean, it's just, it's just funny how these guys do this. But he's also, John has also inked tons of issues of Amazing Spider-Man and other series, and he's also inking Bagley in the upcoming Adjectiveless Spider-Man series, which is written by Dan Slott. Maybe you'll have some info about that later on. So why don't for now we hear from John Dell. Hey, this is Mark Ginocchio of Amazing Spider Talk here on the floor of TerrifiCON at Mohegan Sun, and I am joined today by artist extraordinaire John Dell. John, of course, has worked on Spider-Man in both Ultimate Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man. I'm sure I'm leaving out other books. Superior Spider-Man. Case in point. I mean, you've been all over the title for years now. Thanks for joining us on the show. Obviously, it's Spider-Man's 60th anniversary, and wanted to talk to some of the creators involved with them. First off, with you, we always want to know what your origin story with the character is. I mean, were you always a fan of Spidey growing up? Do you remember your first book? What's your connection to the character and getting to work on him?
I fell in love with Spider-Man back when Gil Kane and Ross Andrew were drawing it.
Yeah.
When the big villains were Hammerhead and Stegron and Doc Ock marrying Aunt May. So I had a big love for the character right off the start, 9-10 years old. So it's just, to be working on the title is just the little kid in me just coming alive and dancing in my head.
Yeah. Have you talked to Jerry Conway?
No, I did ride here from the airport in a limo with him.
Oh, nice.
But I was too embarrassed to actually say I didn't want to gush on him.
Yeah,
so
understood.
Kept it cool, kept it professional.
Obviously, one of the big people that you have inked over the years is sitting a couple of booths down. It's Mark Bagley. What's been your Mark Bagley? There we go.
He's worked on Spider-Man?
I think so. Apparently, yeah. What is that partnership, that collaboration been like? I always love hearing from the pencilers and the inkers and kind of how they work together on stuff like that.
I'll give it up for Mark. Mark is the penciler I would have loved to have become. I started out wanting to draw and ink. Instead of inking, I wound up inking because I couldn't draw fast enough. And Mark comes, I think, from the same era as me. He's not afraid to draw anything on the page, and lots of it. And I love the fact that he just goes into it. His expressions, everything he puts on the page is just pure magic. And he gives me enough room to hang myself or to make him look pretty, which I really like. So it's a really great partnership. And just talking to him on the phone, it's a lot of. This is the first time I've actually met him.
Oh, wow!
So it's a really good meeting with him, and just really great to talk to on the phone. A great professional. I love the guy.
That's crazy. So this happened a few years ago on our show. We had on Nick Spencer, and we had them on the show. They were like, "Oh, this is actually the first time we've like talked on a computer to each other." And it's like, I'm like thinking to myself, like, you mean you guys aren't like?
Well, yeah, I'm down in New Orleans, and it's just we don't really live next door to each other. So it's places like this that we actually get to meet and talk to each other.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And obviously, one of the big projects that you've done in your career was Ultimate Spider-Man,
yes.
and again, kind of looking retrospectively at the history of the character. I mean, like Ultimate Spider-Man opened up the character to like a whole new generation of people, and you were a part of that. I mean, do you kind of think like look on that and reflect on that and
again, the little kid in me was doing handsprings the whole time because I'm thinking like, oh, this is the Vulture, this is the Scorpion, just the first time inking Peter Parker was like, I'm inking Peter Parker.
Yeah.
So it's really a big thrill. I'm still such a fanboy. I really am.
Yeah.
And then when I ink when I work on those books, it's such a thrill. It really is.
And when you were working on Amazing Spider-Man, during the Volume 5 era, if you will, was it exciting to be back on the book, like on the main book again? I mean, do you think about it that way? I mean, do some creators think like, oh, one's the main book and the other's the B book?
Look, anytime he's in his regular costume, I am so happy. I mean, I like all the variant costumes. I love all the magic that they're bringing with that, the multiverse. But when it's Peter and he's in his Union suit, his original Steve Ditko Union suit, I'm just the happiest. And again, like the title, Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
That's what I read growing up. So, yeah.
You've addressed this question a few in different forms, right? But I'm going to just ask it one more because I've been trying to end with this one. Again, 60th anniversary. You've been a contributor. What does that mean to you personally that you worked on Spider-Man, that you were part of the story?
I feel like I'm part of a really rich history. There's so many names, big names, and so many things attached to the character that to me that I'm actually a part of. Mm-hmm. I'm sitting in class, 9 years old, drawing Spider-Man, copying a Gil Kane drawing of Spider-Man, and now I'm actually working on the book. I mean, that's crazy. That's such a lottery. And I bless I'm so happy that I'm actually part of that. And like you said, the 60th anniversary. Yeah. I'm a kid drawing. Oh, that's so awesome.
Is there any work coming up you want to promote or things to look out for? You going to be making an appearance in any Spidey books in the future, you think? Or,
actually, Mark and I are working on another story that's kind of been teased so far. Dan Slott's writing it, Mark's penciling it. It's 6 issues. Don't want to give too much of it away. We're going to try and wrap up the Spideyverse.
Right.
And it's going to have some new nastiness showing up.
Yeah.
So that's that. Look forward to that. I'm having fun. I'm already working on the 3rd issue, and I'm happy.
What's it like working on these multiverse Spider-Man characters? I mean, is that a new level of fun? I mean, do you have to do extra research for these? I know.
I just trace. I don't have to do any of that. Mark does all the hard stuff.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, John, thank you so much for joining us on the show, and enjoy the rest of the con.
All right, thank you very much.
You got it.
Pleasure.
All right, let's keep this inking train rolling. Who do we have next?
Next is Sam De La Rosa. He's another inker who has worked a lot with Mark Bagley, among others, and he's best known for his work on the various Venom and other symbiote-centric comics from the 1990s.
Some of my favorites.
And early 2000s. I know, right? These are some formative comics of Dan Gavassin's career here. So, of course, I had to ask Sam about what it's like inking those damn symbiotes, which we've been told many times over the years they are a pain in the neck to draw. And then we talk about some of his other work and his current, he's actually retired from comics, but he's loving the con circuit and talks a bit about all of that right now.
Hey, this is Mark Giannacchio from the Amazing Spider Talk podcast here on the floor of TerrifiCON at Mohegan Sun, and I am joined by Sam De La Rosa. Sam, of course, is a Spider-Man artist, probably best known for a lot of your work on Venom and the symbiotes. We're here celebrating the 60th anniversary of Spider-Man and all things Spidey, and Sam, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate that, Mark. I'm just glad to be here with so many great guests, and some of us worked on Spider-Man, and just happy that the show is showcasing these artists.
Yeah. Well, I always want to ask people, especially those that we haven't gotten a chance to talk to before, what is your origin story when it comes to Spider-Man? I mean, were you always a fan of the character growing up? I mean, what was it like to be, go from being, I'm assuming, a fan of some sort to working on the character too?
As a fan, I'm probably the same as everybody else. I came across Spider-Man comics in the early 60s.
Yeah.
First issue that I bought was The Amazing Spider-Man number 8. I still have it to this day. Unfortunately, it's not in mint condition, but that's what got me started.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the work of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, the co-creators of Spider-Man, and that's what got me started. I was already drawing, and once I saw comic books, I just started drawing comic book characters.
Yeah.
So that got my interest, and it's held ever since.
Now, obviously, fast forwarding a bit, when you got an opportunity to work on Venom Lethal Protector. Of course, at the time, Venom is like the biggest thing in the world. I mean, at least he seemed like to me at the time, and I'm sure a lot of the creators who worked on him too. I mean, what was that like for you to kind of get to work on that character at such a key point in like the character's popularity?
Well, Mark, it was just very exciting. I started work at Marvel in 1982.
Yeah.
Within a year, I was already working on his stories with his classic costume. I remember first time I worked on it was an issue of What If, and it was called What If Uncle Ben Had Lived.
Yeah.
It was like a 50-page book, and I got to work on Spider-Man and, his villains and cast of characters. So the following year, I believe, the black suit was introduced in '84.
Yeah.
And about a month or so after that was introduced, I started working on him in the pages of Marvel Team Up Annual number 7.
Oh, wow.
So I tell people I worked on Venom before he was Venom.
Right.
So it wasn't until '88 that he was created as Venom. And he was just such an exciting character. It was cool to work on Spider-Man in the black suit.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it wasn't any easier.
Yeah.
That you didn't have to do all the webbing.
Yeah.
It still took time because he was all in black and you had to highlight his form and muscles.
Yeah.
So that took just the same amount of time. But, Venom was such an exciting character. Marvel came to me 6 months before the series was going to debut, and they said, Sam, we want you on the team, but you can't tell anyone.
Right.
So for 6 months, I couldn't say a word, but just happy to be part of the team.
Now, you mentioned it not being easier in the black suit. We had talked to Mark Bagley a few years ago, and he had talked about what a pain in the neck it is to draw the symbiote. So from your standpoint, like, do you share that opinion?
I enjoy the symbiotes. Yes, they are tricky and time consuming.
Yeah.
But you got 2 female symbiotes. You got Scream and Agony. You got Phage, Lasher, and Riot. They're just different forms of Venom and Carnage. So I've always enjoyed them.
Fast forwarding again a few years ago when the Venom movies came out. I mean,
Yes.
that obviously revived a lot about the character. I mean, he seems to be everywhere again. I mean, not that he necessarily ever fully went away, but so is that like a point of pride for you that
it sure is, Mark. Yeah, it sure is, because Venom has always been popular. I've been going to shows since the book debuted. When it first debuted, I got flown out to a store, sold 1,000 copies of that book, the first day. And he's been going strong ever since. He's in merchandising. But once the movie was announced, and once I saw that, hey, they're using Venom Lethal Protector, the whole 6-issue series. Yeah. They're also using Venom Separation Anxiety 1 through 4 that I also worked on. Yep. Plus, they're using a bit of Planet of the Symbiotes. Well, that's 10 books alone that I got to work on. So I was just very excited, and I just felt fortunate that, stuff I got to work on was chosen to be made into movies.
Yeah. just as a kind of capper on the conversation here, again with the 60th anniversary of Spider-Man in mind, and you hit on it. You got to work on some key points in the character's history before they were really key points. I mean, even like the What If story. Like What If is kind of like the OG multiverse. I feel for Marvel. So what does it mean to you personally that you got to be a part of this character's story and a part of a significant part of Marvel history?
It wasn't until after I retired from doing comic books that I was able to just reflect and appreciate the opportunities that I got from all companies, including Marvel, especially on Spider-Man. They trusted me with the character. I worked for Danny Fingeroth, the Spider-Man editor, for so many years, and just very happy that they had confidence in me to continuously give me work. They gave me so much work, I had to turn it down. Like, Danny, I got to sleep, so I cannot work on Spider-Man 365, the hologram issue.
Right.
I got to sleep. But I really appreciate it, that they looked at me, in such light.
I know you said you're retired, but do you feel like you have any more, at least from a Spidey standpoint, any storytelling left in you for that? Or?
Yeah, I would love to, continue working in comics, but the pay is not the greatest. Unfortunately, I could not make a good living. I have a wife and 3 school-age kids at this point, and with what they pay in comics, I cannot manage that. I do very well at weekend shows. It's not hard work.
Right.
Working on comics is hard work. It's a solitary, isolated job, and I'm glad that I got to do that for decades. But I'm even happier now that I get to talk to the people who appreciated the stuff I got to work on.
Definitely. You got any appearances coming up or anything you want to promote for yourself, where to follow you or anything like that?
I do. Would you believe, Mark, that I have an appearance just about every weekend?
Okay.
So
you make the rounds.
It's not a month down the line or anything like that. I can only go to shows as a guest of that show.
Gotcha.
I couldn't pay my way where I want to go, so I get offers from all across the country to be at their show. They pay expenses. I come, and then I hope to sell to make it worthwhile, to leave my family and continue, paying bills and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm all across the country. I'm in other countries also. Been to Costa Rica, Honduras, Canada, Dubai.
Oh wow!
So
you get
Ireland,
around.
So I'm looking forward to the world opening up soon.
Yeah.
And then I can get out some more.
Excellent. Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining us. It was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate Mark, and people can follow me on social media. Search artist Sam De La Rosa on both Instagram and Facebook.
Awesome. Great. Have a good one, man. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Great. I love hearing from these inkers, and Sam was an awesome guest. So who do we have next, Mark?
Next, we have Tim Townsend, who just finished up a stint inking Chris Bachalo on Nonstop Spider-Man. Tim was a lot of fun, and I got to tell you, Dan, we've been asking variations of this question for years about what it means personally for people who have worked on Spider-Man. But I got to say, Tim probably maybe second to Ron Friends, because I know you made him cry when you asked him this. So I mean, let's face it, when it comes to genuineness, nothing tops Ron Friends, but this is a close second. Tim Townsend's answer to that question I thought was pretty remarkable, and he was just a lot of fun, and I think someone we should definitely consider as a returning guest on this show next time he's working on the series, because he just seems like a load of fun and just a great guy to talk to. So Tim, take it away.
This is Mark Giannacchio from Amazing Spider Talk, on the floor once again from TerrifiCON here at Mohegan Sun, and I am joined by Tim Townsend, comic book artist, and most recently we've seen some of his work on Spider-Man stories like Nonstop Spider-Man. Tim, how you doing? How's the show going for you so far?
Doing great, man. I'm in love with this show.
Yeah,
this is fantastic.
It's very
best venue ever.
It's very comics oriented, which you don't get at the.
No, I was noticing that yesterday. I'm not seeing like a lot of anime or. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
It seems very comic and art centric.
Well, Tim, obviously, you've worked on a bunch of superheroes over the years, but we're a Spider-Man show, so we always want to ask people,
Wait, what if I want to talk about the X-Men?
Well, you can. I mean, we like all comics, but yeah, we always like to ask creators about like their origin stories as it relates to Spider-Man. I mean, you've done some fun stuff over the years with the character, but like, do you have a special affinity towards him? Do you remember some of your earlier stories with him?
Oh man, who doesn't love Spidey? I'm trying to think honestly, I think the very first book I worked on with Spidey in it was when I was working with Joe Madureira on Uncanny X-Men. Can't remember the issue number offhand, but it had Spidey on the cover, Spidey through the entire issue, and actually I think that's one of the best issues we did of our whole run.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Joe has one of my favorite takes on the character ever.
Is that the one with Jonah and he's got like the disc or something? Yeah, that's a great art. It's an underappreciated
and it was
Spider-Man via another story.
And it was like all Spider-Man throughout an X-Men. See, I got to talk about the X-Men.
Yeah, there you go.
See what I did
there? Talk to me a little bit about Nonstop Spider-Man. I mean, that was such a it seems like a very unique So I mean, what was it like working on that? It's from your standpoint as the inker. I mean, like it just seemed
it was literally nonstop.
Yeah. I mean, but it's also like in terms of the way the visuals push the storytelling. It's like very, compare it to something you would get in like Amazing Spider-Man. It was very different. So like, how do you approach a book like that from your standpoint?
Get a lot of sleep because it's going to be a long day.
Yeah.
Every single page I remember talking to Chris Pachalo about that. And I think like 3 issues in, we were just like, oh my God, this really literally is nonstop.
Yeah.
It was just so dense. Lots and lots of work, but very, very gratifying. I mean, as a comic book fan, I mean, you're busting your butt working, but at the same time, it's like a nerd dream.
Yeah.
Everything that was going on in that book.
Yeah. It's fun. I've been talking to a couple of anchors today, and they had mentioned like, John Dell sitting next to Mark Bagley, and he's like, "This is the first time I've actually ever met him in person," and which just seems wild to me. So you've obviously worked with some amazing pencilers over the years in terms of Joe Mads, Chris Bachlo. I mean, like, what's your rapport like with them? I mean, do you like hang out? Do you talk on the phone? I mean, what's the process for you guys?
I'm a pretty friendly guy. I'm a hugger. I'm one of those guys. I have a hard time working with someone for any length of time without kind of even inadvertently getting to know them. Some better than others, but I mean, Joe Mad, he's like a little brother. He's one of my best friends. Even though we don't keep up like on a daily basis or anything, we always hit the ground running when we do. Chris Bachalo, I mean, God, I've been with him longer than my wife. We worked together for like 3 years, something like that. So you don't work that this closely, this symbiotically with somebody that long without developing a friendship.
Is there any Spidey adjacent either characters or concepts or whatever that you haven't had a chance to work on yet that you really want to dive into at some point?
Personally, and being an inker, I think a lot of the stuff that I have the most fun with tends to be textural, like opportunities to play around with texture, and like the Shed story that Chris and I did with Zeb Wells goes down in my mind as one of my favorite projects. Just lizard scales everywhere.
Yeah.
And Chris and I both had an absolute blast on that. And the writing, that goes as one of my favorite projects for sure.
Yeah. Something we always like to ask everybody, and I think it's especially relevant with the 60th anniversary this summer, as someone who has contributed to the story of Spider-Man, both in Amazing and in Nonstop and elsewhere, what does it mean to you personally that you were a part of this great character's narrative?
It's not... When I hear somebody like you say it that way, it kind of gives me tingles because I don't really think about it that way. Would it be cheesy to just say I'm just happy to be here? Yeah, I mean, wow. When you put it like that, it's obviously it's an honor, to think that I brought anything at all to the character that raised me.
Yeah,
it's humbling. Yeah, it's humbling.
Excellent. Well, where can we see some of your work coming up in the next couple of months?
Right at this minute, I'm doing some Spider-Man. I think they're all Spider-Man related covers with Ryan Stegman.
Oh, nice.
I don't have any like big projects lined up right now. I'm just kind of focusing on cover work at the moment and kind of taking it easy for a while. But the stuff with Ryan Stegman's really, really fun.
Yeah, he's a troublemaker. We've had him on a couple
Yeah,
of
he
times.
is. He is. We tolerate him.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, excellent. Well, Tim, is there any way we can follow you, buy your work online, anything like that you want to plug? Or?
Yeah, I mean, just you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. I'm not a Twitter guy, but you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. Just look up, Tim Townsend, and
you got it.
Yeah, you'll see a lot of pictures of my dog in the hot tub.
That's that's kind of the content I'm looking for on social media.
Not a lot of comic stuff, a lot of dogs in hot tubs.
People say to me, your Twitter stuff is all like, baseball and dogs now. I'm like, well, that's really all I want to talk about because everything else is just so toxic right now.
Exactly.
So, anyway, well, Tim, thanks so much for taking a few minutes.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. Have a great rest
Thanks
of the show.
for having me.
You got it.
You weren't wrong about that interview, Mark. Tim sounds like a really great guy. So who was your last inker that you talked to?
The last person I spoke to on Saturday was Keith Williams, who has been a professional comic book artist since the 1980s and has inked several Spider books, including Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, and, of course, Adjectiveless, the original version. Also, just on a fun note, and this was also a good icebreaker for Keith, he's going to be making an appearance at an upcoming very small Comic-Con in my hometown of East Rockaway, New York, which I was kind of like, how did you get hooked up with this? And it's we didn't talk about it online, but it was an interesting story nevertheless. Let's bring Keith Williams on because he's probably the only other person besides me who can find my hometown on a map. So let's go.
So this is Mark Giannacchio once again on the floor here at TerrifiCON for Amazing Spider Talk, and I am talking to comic book artist Keith Williams. Now, Keith, of course, has worked on Spider-Man several times over the years, whether it's Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, tons of other books and appearances, and that's not just all that he's worked on, of course, but as a Spider-Man podcast, that's what we want to talk to you about. So Keith, thanks so much for joining us. How's the show going for you so far?
Oh, it's going great. Had a great Friday. You know, a lot of fans.
Yeah. We've been to this show a few times over the years, and this is far and away the busiest I've seen it here. So, I mean, it's good to see that the cons are coming back and, people are out and enjoying it, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I did want to ask you, as a first-time guest on our show, we always like to ask people about their origins with Spider-Man. It might be an obvious question, but were you always a fan of the character growing up, and how did that kind of play into your opportunity to finally work on him?
Oh, I love the character. I watched the show, the animated show on Channel 7. When it came on Saturday morning.
Yeah.
So and I was reading the comic book even before that. It was one of the things that made me interested in becoming a comic book artist. I love drawing. And that was one of the things. And after I finished college, I was lucky enough to be able to do background artwork on Marvel Team Up with Spider-Man and whoever else was
whoever
be in there.
The hero du jour.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, and I was working over with Mike Esposito, who's the inker. Mm-hmm. So he would do the figures, and I would do all the background work. So I got to see an actual Spider-Man pages at that time. So that was my, my introduction into the world of Marvel and Spider-Man as a professional.
Yeah, as an inker, you're working with a lot of different pencilers who all bring their own style and approach to obviously a character. So when you're working on someone like Spider-Man across different titles and years and whatnot, like as an inker, what do you have a different approach for different pencils, or how do you approach each commission, I guess, if you will, for that?
Yeah, that's true. It all depends on who I'm working over. Sometimes I could work with a focal pen or a brush. Yeah. Focal pen has more of a mechanical feel to it, while brush has more organic. Yeah. So it all depends on who the penciler is. If it would be somebody like, I guess, Ron Friends, I could use a brush. He has a more organic kind of feel to his stuff. Right. Whereas I'm trying to figure out a penciler who's more. Who's more like a pen, but I guess Greg Capullo, I worked on him on Quasar. I kind of like bounced between a pen and a brush. He had that kind of like feel, and I try to make sure that the essence of the penciler is in there still. You know, like I don't try to smother it. I don't do that.
Is there anything specific to Spider-Man from an inking standpoint that either stands out as a good thing or maybe a pain in the neck? I was talking to Sam De La Rosa earlier, and he was like, even black suit Spider-Man's still a pain in the neck to draw with the webbing sometimes.
Oh, yeah, sure. Because you got to know your anatomy.
Yeah.
So even with the black suit, you still got to show highlights.
Yeah.
It's like reverse. It's actually like reverse highlights on the black costume. And then on the regular costume, it's the webbing.
Yeah.
But like after a while, you figure out your own little trick on how to do the webbing so that it doesn't drive you crazy.
Yeah.
And it actually looks consistent.
Yeah.
So, but I would say that those are the things. And the more recent Spider-Man drawings, like he's really like, I don't know, triple flexible or something like that. So like you got the leg up behind the head and all that stuff. So I think that's really crazy, but it's also kind of fun too. You know? But that could be a little nuts to figure out.
Yeah, definitely. And you came up at a time, a lot of your work in the 90s, you had the McFarlanes and the Larsons, and then maybe more classical artists like an Alex Saviak and stuff like that. So that really must make it challenging for you to kind of just
figure out which one you want to do. Yeah. Well, I do like the McFarlanes, stuff, but I also love the Romita.
Yes.
Work that he did. It was absolutely incredible stuff. It had a solid feel to it. I really love that. I really love that stuff. And I think that might be more what I lean towards, but I always throw in a little bit maybe of McFarlane or Lawson. Too. And Ditko.
Yeah,
Ditko,
of course.
Because I like the skinnier Spider-Man.
Right.
Not the the really simple.
Yeah.
The skinnier one makes him look more like a kid, I guess.
Yeah.
And I still like the fact that that's what he started out as, a high school kid, and I think that related to me when I was,
definitely. One of the things we ask creators sometimes, especially those who've worked on Spidey on different books and then ultimately on Amazing Spider-Man is, some talk about how when I worked on Amazing, I felt like I graduated to like the major leagues from the minor leagues, and I'm curious, did that ever cross your mind when you worked on ASM versus Web Of or Spectacular or Team Up or anything like that? Or were you just happy, work is work, and you were just happy to be working on the character in any capacity?
I was happy to work on a character in any capacity.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you're working on Spider-Man.
Yeah.
I mean, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And then, even for a little while, I was an assistant editor on the book. Mm-hmm. For about 9 months, which was absolutely amazing to work on the flagship character of Marvel Comics. Yeah, my mind was blown.
Yeah.
But so it was like work was fun. It was nail biting.
Yeah.
It was always a great experience.
The last thing I just wanted to ask you about, again, with the kind of the backdrop of this being the 60th anniversary year, as someone who has worked on a character as iconic as Spider-Man, what does it mean to you personally that you've contributed to the Spider-Man mythos or narrative? I mean, like, do you think in that kind of broad terms, or are you just like, it was a gig?
Well, it was fun. It was a dream come true. Mm-hmm. Never thought I'd really do it before I started doing it.
Yeah.
No idea. Spider-Man, my God.
Yeah.
It's something that was incredible when I was doing it, that I will never forget that I've done it. Oh, it is a job, but it's such a cool job.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. It's something that I love to do.
Yep.
And yeah.
And then you can come to places like this and have people, ask you obscure questions about what you do.
Yeah, it's always fun.
Yeah.
And the fans are cool.
Yeah.
So, it's great being here.
Definitely. Well, is there any place where we can find more of your work or upcoming appearances you want to promote or anything like that?
Well, okay. I will be in Cincinnati Comic-Con, Colorado Comic-Con.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the Fan Expo Boston
Mm-hmm.
that's coming up soon, and there's a bunch of other shows too. I just can't remember.
Definitely. Well, Keith, thank you so much for taking a couple of minutes out, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your con here.
Oh, thank you.
You got it.
Thank
Right.
you so much.
All right, have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that conversation you had with Keith Williams. He sounds like another fun person that we could have back on the show. But earlier you mentioned that you went to a number of panels. You know, it's celebrating Spidey's 60th. Tell us a little bit about some of them.
Yeah, well, the 60th anniversary of Spider-Man panel, that had Gerry Conway, Dan Jurgens, which was, I never heard Dan Jurgens talk about Spider-Man before, so that was pretty fascinating to hear that connection. Terry Kavanagh, of course, and Howard Mackie, they were back. And then immediately after, we had the great John Romita Jr. on as a panel. It was a one-on-one with John Suntras from Word Balloon. And, you know, I had tried to connect with JR earlier during the con, but I got to tell you, he was swamped. In fact, he was so swamped at one point during the signings, Howard Mackie came over to him with a sketchbook and said, "Hey, John, can you give me one of your favorite Spider-Man poses? You know, him stooped over on top of a building in the rain." Because this is like something apparently Mackie just likes to harass JR about. And when we had JR on, he said the same. He likes drawing superheroes in the rain, and he talked about that. And Mackie just was killing him for it all weekend. So much so that Mackie will appear again during this panel. But I don't know what it's going to say. We have excerpts of it courtesy of John Suntras, because I had some technical difficulties in getting my own audio. So I do want to spend special thanks out to John for giving us access to his Word Balloon podcast to use some of the audio here. I just thought this was really relevant because, in addition to the Mackie conversation, JR talks a little bit about working with Zeb Wells and just some other recent stuff that he's been doing. So why don't we let the great John Romita Jr. once again take it away on our show.
Zeb is, I told him this in an email, that he's challenging, but it's not a bad challenge. It would be boring had he not been challenging. He asks in a microcosm. I'll give you an example. Everything happens at 11:59 on New Year's Eve in Times Square, with both groups of villains and good guys fighting at the same time. Panel 2. He's a brilliant writer, and he's challenging, and that's the best thing about it, because then I don't tend to do the same old garbage that I've done in the past. And that's the great thing about working with a young guy. And unfortunately, I'm older than all the writers I work with. I can't do anything about that.
That's all right.
So they bow. They say, "Oh, no, we think you're experienced." So they give me latitude, and they let me play with the story. And that's the best thing about it. Hobgoblin. Okay. And by the way, I ripped off the Green Goblin. Complete rip-off of the Green Goblin. Do not be impressed. I turned back the money I got on the royalties because I was so embarrassed. I said, I'll give it to Steve Ditko, but he had passed already. So, okay, all right.
So you get to draw Norman Osborn and this new Hobgoblin coming out in Amazing Spider-Man #7. What can you tell us about this story?
That I despise drawing Norman Osborn's hair.
It is gross.
You have no idea. Ask Scott Hanna, who works with me on the character. We hate it. It's more than annoying. All I can tell you is I can't tell you anything, because the Hobgoblin is now a mystery again. Yes. But that's the best thing about it. Now, Zeb Wells took a very uncomfortable situation about nobody being able to tell who it was, and then we always admitted who it was. He's got everybody on the hook, including me. Maybe because he hasn't decided himself.
So you don't know who the Hobgoblin is?
If I did, I couldn't tell you. And I'm a lousy liar. In a casual conversation, even while I was with DC, I said, somebody said, what would you do if you went back to Marvel? I said, well, I'd love to do Spider-Man again, Daredevil, and everything else. I forgot which characters I mentioned. And the editor of the book heard that conversation and said, when I was told that I was going to be offered a contract, he called me and said, we'd like to have you and Scott back on Spider-Man, and we'll do this, and this. They got Zeb Wells. They didn't offer anything else. Maybe that was... Now, they did say you have a choice between the X-Men and Spider-Man. And I said, how about we do Spider-Man first, and then I'll get on the X-Men and I'll try it. And now that's doing well enough. And then they said, how about Daredevil? So there's suddenly things... But the sales on Spider-Man are strong, and they don't want to buck the system. And as long as the stories are this good, and that writer is Zeb, I'm really enjoying myself. I'm having a good time. I think I'll stick with this for now. But who knows what's going to happen next year? We'll see what happens. Now, if I hit the lottery, I'm going to go disappear to the Bahamas.
Really long-time fan. I have a two-part question. One, is it true that when you were younger you wanted to be a meteorologist? And part two, what is your favorite position to draw a hero, specifically Spider-Man?
I never wanted to be a meteorologist, but I wanted to be an astronaut. So if I got high enough, I could drop shit on your house. What was the second question?
What position on a cover in particular do you really like to? It ties into the first one.
I love putting a character on a rooftop in the rain. All right? Is that what you want? All right.
Johnny, that's truly, absolutely. The first image I ever saw of you drawing was Daredevil in the rain.
In fairness to me, when I was a kid and there was nothing except the 3 networks and the movies on the weekends, and if it's raining, my father said, "Come here, kid, watch this movie." It was a Philip Marlowe, it was Humphrey Bogart with a hat and a collar, and it was raining all the time.
Absolutely.
Then as I got educated in art, it was French art, was film noir. So it was something that I always admired about the mood. And I vowed to do every character I've ever drawn in the rain somewhere. And Howard apparently doesn't like it.
I love it!
And by the way, wait till you see what I'm doing in your book. It's no characters, it's just effing rain. We'll talk about that when we work on our next project together.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
And then the inkers, Klaus and Scott Hanna, they scream. I can hear them without the phone. They scream because it's a lot of details and all the... Although I haven't done a full book in the rain. I've only done a couple of pages and a lot of covers. Thank you, Howard, for being such a pain in the ass.
No, truly.
When is your panel next?
You missed
when
it.
Is your? I missed your panel.
Yeah.
Crap.
The last one. Absolutely.
Well, I can't get enough of John Romita Jr. both in speech and in artwork. But it was also great to hear John Centris. Word Balloon has been a favorite of mine, and crazy podcast crossovers going on here. This is the podcast version of Secret Wars. There's incursions happening. Will you destroy the other universe so that we survive, Mark?
I don't know. I mean, I was going to actually compare it to like when the critic showed up on The Simpsons and just be like, "It stinks." But that's just me. That's where my pop culture brain went. But Secret Wars is probably more apropos right now. But Dan, I was not the only one to have lots of fun over the last couple of weeks. It sounds like you were up to no good. So why don't you tell us about your journey?
Yeah, sure, Mark. Like I said earlier, I've been on a bit of house arrest over the past 2 months. In a good way, caring for my newborn son while trying to avoid giving him or his mother COVID. But I was able to sneak out to the beachside town of Ventura to hit up a comic shop called Arsenal Comics and Games. They do amazing signings at their 2 different locations. They have one in Ventura and one in Thousand Oaks. For Californians out there, you can take the 101 to the. I'll leave that alone.
Oh my goodness!
The Californians. But yeah, so like I had been there before. I went to a Rob Liefeld signing of all things. But for issue 900, they commissioned a special variant cover from artist Todd Nuack to showcase this local landmark called the Two Trees in Ventura, California. The cover has Spider-Man and Groot hanging out, looking over the city and beaches of Ventura. And if you go on, if you're someone who uses like the CLZ app, like I do to collect all of my things, you'll see it right in there. There is a variant cover that you can only get from this comic shop. So in order to celebrate the cover, they invited Dan Slott, Zeb Wells, Daniel Kibblesmith, and Todd Nuack, all creators whose work appears in Amazing Spider-Man number 900, to do a signing there. And I was able to sneak in early, like my version of a press pass, to talk with all of them. But, I think Arsenal wasn't really quite aware of what they, like kind of the hit they had on their hands. Like the line got long super quick. Yeah. So I was only able to talk to them for a little bit. I talked to Zeb, not on microphone, unfortunately, and got a little bit of some hints about his run that I won't spoil here, and he's just a really nice guy, and I hope to get him appearing on the show soon. But I was able to get Dan Slott on the microphone, because if I was going to choose between the two of them, Dan Slott has been like the guy we've been chasing after for a really long time, and he was so nice and so great, gracious in talking to me. And I definitely fanboyed out a little too hard, Mark. I get very excitable, and I worry I freaked him out a little bit, but I'm sure he's used to crazy fans in a negative way. So hopefully I was crazy in a positive way. But anyway, we did a short interview, right. And while the people at Arsenal were telling me to wrap it up because the line was about to come in, so I got what I could, guys, and hopefully you'll enjoy some of his answers to some of my kind of broad questions about the 60th anniversary. So I'm going to say it. Take it away, Dan Slott. I'm here with none other than Dan Slott, a legend around these parts.
Hello.
And Dan, I just kind of wanted to get, a brief
I'm talking to you through a mask.
Yes, we are both talking through a mask. So
anyone can wear the mask.
And in this case,
everyone should wear the mask.
Yes, it's responsible to wear the mask.
Yes.
So we are right. The 900th issue you contributed to, and you
2 pages.
Hey, look, you know what? Take those 2 pages.
Oh no! Nick Lowe, the editor of Spider-Man, they knew we were coming back, me and Bagley, for Spider-Man 1, and he reached out to me. He's like, "Would you like to do a story for the 60th?" And I pitched him the story, and he's like, "Oh, that's really good." And I'm like, "You want to, it's going to go in Amazing Fantasy 1000." And I'm like, "Oh, no, I want to be in 900. He's like, "Why?" He's like, "I want to keep the streak going, man."
What kind of curse do you have on Marcos Martin?
Oh, no. But okay. So the thing is like, well, we really like the one, the Amazing Fantasy 1000. I'm like, dude, just let me do 2 pages, 2-page story. Let me get in there. Let me keep the streak going. Come on, man. 600, 700, 800, 900. Let me keep the streak. Let me be the Centennial Man. And he was like, all right. So, yeah. I pitched him that story, and I said I could get Marcos Martin on it. Marcos does not do interiors anymore. He just doesn't.
Unless your name is Dan Slott.
I'll call him up, and I'm like, dude, you want to do a 1-page story? And I'm like, what? For Marvel Comics 1000? Come on, 1 page. You go, what's it about? And I tell him, he's like, all right, for you, I'll do that. And then, I call him up, and I'm like, dude, they asked me if I want to do a Conan story. And he's like, I've never done a Conan story. I'm like, no, I know. I've never done a Conan story. And I'm like, what if I got it down to 6 pages? Could you do it with 6 pages? And he's like, I could do it with 6 pages. Let's do Conan. And then this was like, we'll be in 900. Come on, 2 pages. 900, 2 pages. Come on. He's like, what's the story? And I tell him the story, and he's like, oh, I will draw that. For you, I will draw that.
It's sad to hear you say that, because his layouts are so wonderful. There's a real artistry, obviously, to that, and to have him kind of step away from that.
Well, he's working on Fridays on Panel Syndicate, Create Our Own Book, with Brian K. Vaughan. With Ed Brubaker. Fridays is wonderful. Everyone should be reading Fridays.
Absolutely. So, okay, we're here to talk about Spider-Man.
Yes.
Now. So, it's the 60th anniversary of Spider-Man.
Yes.
Right, which is a big deal. And,
huge.
You have, said a lot about your contribution to the character, in that you've been on it for so long, and you wrote so many titles. I'm curious to you, you had this tweet a little while back about, there are some indelible aspects to the character, and other things that people add that last for a little while and disappear. I'm curious what you think the indelible parts of the character are, and what maybe you contributed that you consider or hope will be indelible.
Well, I think the indelible things I've given to Spider-Man are tech suits, the ability to jump through other portals.
Not related.
All the things you think about with a street level character like Spider-Man. And brain swapping. Yeah, so I think those are indelible. No. No.
You say that, but we have a Spider-Verse, multiple Spider-Verse movies, and Lord knows a superior movie, I'm sure, is someone is reading that book and going, could we do this?
Well, I think Alfred Molina might be a little too. Well, you never know. You could CGI anything.
You don't even need him. You just he could be a decaying corpse.
And
then
not the great Alfred Molina.
And there was a nanotech swap in that movie. Who's to say that didn't swap his brainwaves?
Who's to say? Well, to me, the enduring thing about Spider-Man, and to borrow it from Spider-Verse, it is the anyone can wear the mask. It is that Spider-Man's the guy you know. Even though Peter Parker is a world-class genius, that he's the guy from Queens. You know, the Marvel characters are the guy, like, the DC characters are the icons, the gods. The characters like chiseled into the side of the Acropolis, you know, like arms akimbo, perfect teeth. Marvel characters are like that guy you know, the guy who's late for dinner, the guy who, you know, oh, everyone's got 12 stories about that guy. You know, it's someone you know. And what if they had superpowers?
And Peter Parker seems to be kind of like one of the few holdouts. He still has a secret identity while everybody else is demasking. Like, Marvel, I think, is still the world outside your window, but Peter, I think, still remains indelibly that guy.
Oh, absolutely. Peter is that you can, even when you see something like in Spider-Verse where you get dad bod Spider-Man.
Love it.
Yeah.
We can all relate.
There's something always relatable to Peter Parker. There's something about, like, I remember reading, you know, comics as a kid, and I'd be like, Spider-Man broke his arm, and now it's in a sling. And now he's got to fight the lizard with his arm in a sling.
And he needs a bowl of soup.
Yeah, and you don't see that with Batman. You don't see that with other characters. So, I mean, I kind of love that as a kid, that I never knew what was going to happen in the way you don't know what's going to happen in real life. Yeah, no, Spider-Man's always going to be my favorite for that.
Awesome. Well, we have to wrap things up. I hope we can do this again in a longer format.
Hopefully.
But congratulations on 900.
All the congratulations to Zeb and to Ed for pulling off that epically, you know, start to finish, just one giant epic tale in one issue. Anyone can pick it up. Anyone can read it from any era. And you go, that was a great Spider-Man story.
Awesome. And also, congratulations. We're all looking forward to Spider-Man #1.
With Bagley.
Yeah, very exciting. Thank you again.
Thanks.
All right, so before we close out the show, I did want to say another thank you to Arsenal Comics and Games for inviting me to their signing event. Like I said, if you are a Spider-Man collector like me, you'll want to pick up a copy of their exclusive Todd Nuack cover for issue number 900. You can visit their website. It's marveltva.com. And you can get the cover with everyone's signatures already on it. They offer a cover with like the Amazing Spider-Man logo, and they have another virgin cover that's just like the artwork that they had commissioned from Todd. I'll leave a link to the page in the episode show notes. You can go there and consider making a purchase. They're really awesome people, and they do events like this, so supporting them would be really great. And they were gracious enough or generous enough rather, to invite me. So, you know, supporting them supports maybe more things like this happening in the future. And like I said, Dan Slott expressed an interest in joining the show for a longer interview in the future, especially once his new Spider-Man #1 is released. So if you could let him know that that's something you'd like to see as well, I'm sure it'll help encourage him come on the show. So I just can't believe we got him at all. And I'm very happy to have finally met the guy whose work we've been covering for like 10 years, Mark. So that's pretty cool. Pretty cool thing to have done. And if it made you even the slightest bit jealous, then I consider it mission accomplished.
Well, all I can say is, you know, and I made this joke on Twitter, Dan, is, you know, if Dan Slott's going to come back, you know, I hope he doesn't see my name attached to the show and say, that Shinakio guy, a hard pass on that, right? I mean, like...
maybe we'll both be equally a reason not to come on the show, you know. But I hope not. I hope he decides to come and join us on Amazing Spider Talk. So I know we would roll out a red carpet and give him a nice warm welcome,
of course,
as we do with all of our guests. So Mark, this was really fun having you share all this with us. It was a thrill for me to go out to Arsenal, but man, would I have loved to have joined you at TerrifiCON.
Well, there's always next year, Dan. That's for sure, right? I mean, but Dan Slott at Arsenal, that might just be the one and only. So you got it, buddy.
Well, awesome. Hey, everybody listening, if you do find this show entertaining and valuable, all the work that Mark and I do, please consider supporting us. Recommend Amazing Spider Talk to a friend, and if you're able, become a member on our Patreon.
We can only bring you this content with the support of our Patreon members, and we owe the show's success to every single one of them. And we are constantly making exclusive content for our members. This week, Patreon members will hear Alan and me discuss Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, Number 7, because Dan is still out on paternity leave, despite what this episode is indicating.
Yeah, so why not take $3.99, the price of a new comic, and put it towards a month's subscription to support the show and start receiving our Patreon content. That way you'll hear our Patreon exclusive review podcasts on every new issue of Amazing Spider-Man, which this run is great. You want to hear these reviews. You'll hear them the same week the comics come out instead of waiting for them several weeks later to arrive in our public podcasting feed.
And if you contribute $10 a month, you gain access to exclusive artwork from famous Spider-Man artists, which is commissioned exclusively for our members. We just got news that Barry Kitson is finally finishing up our artwork all the way back from Season 3 of our show, featuring the death of Gwen Stacy. We've also got Juan Ferreira doing a Spider-Man and Daredevil team-up piece for us, and Michael Fife doing a Spider-Man and Venom commission. Plus, every episode we release a new episode-specific desktop background created for us by artist Nick Cagnetti for our patrons to enjoy.
Yeah, and Mark, I did want to say, your trip to Terrificon could only happen with the support of our Patreon. Those funds went into, funding Mark's trip and the time he got to spend there away from his family. So, we are putting those funds to good use. They go directly into making the show better, and this episode is a great reflection of that.
And the equipment too, Dan. And the equipment. It's not just travel junkets. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, right. Mark is just at the buffet enjoying himself.
Yeah, right. There you go.
Another martini, sir.
Nothing like that Mohegan Sun Mediterranean bowl in the food court. Let me tell you, buddies.
Yeah, right. You're just gambling the funds away at Mohegan Sun. Yeah. But I always say this, and I mean it. It's a hard time for everybody, and us too. The Patreon allows us to continue this crazy hobby that Mark and I have. So we do appreciate anyone who supports the show just by listening and sharing it with friends. But if you do have the means, please join our Patreon to support the show's continued existence. And you can do so. There's a link in the description of this episode. You can go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com, and there's a big banner there that will direct you to the Patreon. We'd love it if you would consider joining our members club.
But alas, Dan, it is that time. It's time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, as always, this episode was edited by Rick Coast. Our artwork comes handcrafted by artists Ron Friends, Sal Buscema, Ray Sumser, and Nick Cagnetti. Our theme songs were produced by Rylan Bojack and Spider Madge. Plus, our introduction animation and musical stinger comes from Josh Sutton from the YouTube show Panels to Pixels.
This was a lot of fun, Dan, but what do we have coming up on our next episode?
Well, Mark, we're actually planning on continuing this series with the discussion of all the retcons of Amazing Fantasy 15 that we've gotten over the years. Now, that might sound familiar because I teased last time that would be the next episode you guys were getting. But we had all these awesome interviews, and I thought all of our listeners would really be excited to hear them, so we kind of snuck this one in, and we're going to get back to that episode, in the next couple weeks. So keep, tuned to your subscription feed, and you'll see the next Beyond Amazing episode that's got all those awesome retcons, or maybe not so awesome retcons, that we're going to be discussing. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun, Mark.
All right. Well, I love. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I love talking about retcons, Dan. So, let's just bring it on.
Awesome, Mark. But until next time, we have to leave everyone with our motto, the very thing that forms the backbone of our show. So, Mark, until John Romita Jr. stops drawing Spider-Man crouched in the rain, what's our motto?
With great podcasts, there must also come the amazing Spider Talk.
Don't miss the next installment.